Hey, I want to welcome you back. We're continuing to talk about what it takes to be a hero maker, not settling for being a hero, but a hero maker. And we know there's 5 essential practices for leaders who multiply leaders. And here's the second practice. The second practice of hero making is what we call permission giving. And again, when I'm in large groups, oftentimes I'm pointing to their eyes. To any kind of device I can get to help people memorize it. You know, maybe you want to just do it right there. Just go ahead and point to your eye. Just that, even the physicality of doing that helps you go like eye. Because what happens in this second practice is you begin to see people differently. Instead of just seeing how God can work through your leadership, now you begin to see the leadership potential in all the people that God's put around you. You begin to see the leadership potential all the people God's put around you. I remember it was a week of summer camp in Indiana. Didn't grow up there, but that's where I went to summer camp. And I was in junior high. And as a junior high little dude, I loved hoops, loved basketball, lived and died for basketball. And one of the guys who was there that week at camp was a guy by the name of Dennis Gamoff. Now that may not mean anything to you, but for me, that was a big deal because Dennis Gamoff had been a high school All-American. Dennis Gamoff had played basketball in the Big Ten at Purdue University. He was just a terrific athlete. And so all week, kind of as this little junior high dude, I'm just in awe of Dennis Gamoff. And we just played softball together. And I remember we were leaving the softball field and coming from the softball field back to the cafeteria. And he was behind me. And all of a sudden, I felt this kind of big hand on my shoulder. And I kind of turned around. And he said a few things to me. But then he said this. He said, "Dave, I see in you someone who could be a really, really good leader." And I was like, wow, Dennis Gamoff, sees that in me. And it's amazing. I mean, that's been, years and years ago when I was a little dude. And I still remember that Dennis Gamoff had what I would call an I see in you conversation. And he gave me permission to see in myself maybe something that I didn't even see. And you know what? We see the same thing in the life of Jesus. When Jesus says to his closest followers in Matthew 4:19, "Hey, come follow me." Who did he say this to? He said this to a ragtag group of mostly uneducated, blue-collar, working-class people who were like, Jesus doesn't have time for us. He certainly doesn't have time to invest in us. But when he says, "No, come follow me," here's this rabbi saying, "No, I want to invest my life in training and teaching you." And he consistently did that. And think about what he did with Peter. Specifically with Peter, he says, "Hey, Rock." And he changes his name. He's given him a brand new name and says, "Listen, on you, I'm going to build my church. This movement of love is going to start with you." There's a terrific book out called Growing Young that did a landmark study about millennials and the church. And what they found is that the more you give millennials permission, the more they thrive. The more you see in them and the more you give them permission, the more they thrive. As we were doing research on this hero maker, one of the people that we got a chance to interview for the book was a guy by the name of Sean Sears. Sean tells this unbelievable story that's the opposite of permission giving. When he was in college, he went to college. He wanted to be a youth pastor. And so he got to college and decided to go check out a church. It was kind of the local church that was kind of really happening and really popular kind of church. And so he went there and hoped to get involved in the student ministry. He tracked down the student ministry director there, and he said, "Hey, I'm new here, and I just wanted to volunteer to be a part of your student ministry." The student ministry director says to him, "You know what? Thanks, but we got everything covered. We're all good." And Sean was taken back a little bit, so he kind of pushed him a little more. He said, "Hey, I'm a freshman. I'm going to be here for 4 years. So, I mean, I'll if you put me in, I'll be here for 4 years as a volunteer." And again, the student ministry pastor said, "You know what? We're all set." and then Sean was a very persistent guy. He said, "Well, maybe there's something I could do. Maybe I could give kids rides to the the events." And again, the student pastor said, "We're all good." He said, "Well, what if I showed up early and set things up?" He said, "Hey, we got all the volunteers we need." And finally, in desperation, Sean even said, "What if I came afterwards, after everybody left, I just cleaned up, pizza boxes, whatever debris was left over. I mean, anything I can do." And again, the youth pastor said, "Hey, Sean, thank you, but we have all the volunteers we need." And he said, Sean just walked away, just so discouraged. He said it was a couple weeks later. He went to another church with this girl he was dating, who later became his wife, which was a much less spectacular church. And he'd gone there a few weeks when the pastor sought him out and said, "Hey, Sean, any way you'd like to get involved here?" And Sean could kind of feel a little bit of adrenaline rush. And he said, "Yeah," he said, "I'd like to be a youth pastor someday." And then this pastor says to him, "Well, why someday? Why not now?" So he gave Sean their youth group, which consisted of three middle school kids. And over the next year and a half, he took it from 3 to 35. And that church of 100 people went from 100 to whatever it was, 133 or 34, 35 people there. And that experience transformed Sean's future. He told me this, he said, I want to get this right. He said, that experience put inside me a passion to make sure I was never a roadblock to someone else serving. And if you fast forward, Sean Sears planted a church 12 years ago in Boston called Grace Church. That church has now planted 4 other churches. The first church they planted with a guy who started on his team at 19 years of age. Sean told me this. He said, every church I know, including Grace, is full of leaders. We just have not done a good job of identifying them and giving them permission and releasing them. All right, so this permission giving thing. Let me give you a simple tool for permission giving. I call it an I see in you conversation. I see in you, the 4 most important letters of the alphabet. And it's as simple as this. It's simple as you putting your hand on someone's shoulder, look them in the eye and say, you know what? I see in you this ability. Or I see this gift in you. Or I see God at work in you when. I'm telling you, when you do that, you give them permission to see something in themselves that maybe they don't see. And that's becoming a hero maker. All right? So that's the second practice. And I hope you'll come back as we talk about the third practice of what it takes to be a leader that multiplies leaders, a hero maker.